Hi, today we're going to reconstruct a scene in the Bible. So I don't know if any of you guys like to watch mystery television or any of the kind of like crime shows, but this is a great way to kind of see the Bible, and we're going to read from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. That's where I pulled these stories from, and we're going to talk about Jarius and the woman with the issue of blood. But first, we're going to talk about some of the people writing. It kind of gives us an idea of their character and how they're going to present information. So Matthew was a tax collector. If you're a person that likes to get to the point, he's your guy. He's kind of bullet points about things. And then Mark is a little more of a humanitarian. He came as a follower of Simon Peter, who was a zealot. So, but he seems to be more of a humanitarian in the way he writes. He kind of gets some of the details of, people's dignity. And then Luke, he is a doctor. So he's somewhat a humanitarian, but also kind of notices these other small details that most people maybe wouldn't. So I love reading each story and kind of comparing and overlaying how they see things so you can get kind of more of a three-dimensional picture of what happens. So when the story opens up, Jesus is coming across the sea, and he's going to the land, and there is this guy Jarius there waiting for him. There are several people waiting for him. It's quite a crowd. They all know that Jesus is coming. And so when he lands, Jarius comes to him and throws himself at Jesus' feet. By the way, Jarius was he was the upkeeper of the temple. He was the leader of the synagogue. So he was in charge of making sure that sacrifices were made, the temple was upkept, that kind of stuff. So, but he throws himself at the feet of Jesus. So you see this kind of authority figure recognizing Jesus. And he throws himself at the feet of him and he says, "Jesus, my daughter is dying. Can you please help?" And so Jesus is moved with compassion. And he's like, "Of course I will." And so he's going, and they're making their way through this crowd. And all of a sudden he feels a power go out of him. And he turns and he says, "Who touched me?" And Luke's version mentions Peter, who's like, "Are you kidding, Jesus? Who's not touching you? Look we're all touching each other. It's so crowded here." But he was like, "No, I know." And so in Luke's version, this woman starts trembling. She knows she's going to be found out. She throws herself at the feet of Jesus, and she kind of pleads, like, I'm sorry, like I had to, almost kind of argument. And she tells him what happened. For 12 years I've been sick. I've had this issue of blood. And, and he says, "Well, your faith has made you whole." In Mark's version, he kind of goes into a little more detail about her personal life. It says that she had this issue for 12 years, and she had spent lots of money going to doctors who couldn't fix her, and almost leading, like, some made her worse even. Side note, like, doctors are great, and I love doctors, but Jesus is the only one that really heals us. Doctors treat us. So I just love that you kind of see this woman who, she's done everything, and I'm sure these doctors have done everything they could to help her, but sometimes we just need a savior, whether it's physical or spiritual healing. Anyways, I digress. So she throws herself kind of at his mercy. And then while this is happening in Luke, it says that she's interrupted. And two guards come to see Jarius and say, basically, "Don't bother Jesus. Your daughter's already dead." And Jesus turns to him and he says, "Have faith. Don't worry." And they head off to Jarius's house. When they get there, Matthew says funeral music is playing. I mean, just kind of very nondescript. But both Mark and Luke say, the people are wailing and they're upset. And Jesus comes in and he says, basically, don't be upset. She's only sleeping. She's not dead. And they start laughing at him, which I think is like so crazy. I mean, I know that like people act weird in grief, but I mean, I can understand like crying or putting aside what Jesus says, but they laughed. I don't know, I find that just kind of precarious. Anyways, precarious. But Jesus tells him, he says, to Jarius, he turns to him, he says, have faith. Don't worry about what these guys says. And it says they have them put out of the house. They get everybody out of the house except for Peter, James, and John. And they go up to where the little girl is, and they take the parents up there. And they go, and basically Jesus reaches out and grabs her hand and says, stand up. And she's made whole. And Luke, I love, mentions after that. He's the only one that mentions. And Jesus said, feed her, give her something to eat. Which is funny. That's so the medical side. Take care of this body. But in both stories, the lady with the issue of blood and in Jairus' case, both required faith. They needed to have faith in Jesus so that they would be made whole, or Jairus' daughter would be made whole. And, you have to think of these risks. Here's Jairus, the leader of a synagogue, going to Jesus, someone who is a bit of a lightning rod socially. In the Jewish community, people loved him or hated him. And with this woman with the issue of blood, according to the Levitical law, she should have been out of town. When a woman was on her time of the month, she had to stay outside of town until it was complete, and then she would offer a sacrifice and be made clean. And so for her to even be in town and be with people is a risk. It's a huge risk, let alone touching another man, especially him not being her husband. So this is a huge, huge risk. And in the case of her, Jesus turns to her and says, your faith has made you whole. And I think that that's the thing that God is looking for, is our heart. He saw their heart in both cases, and he helped, shore up Jarius' faith. Each time he got bad news, he told him, have faith. Don't worry. It's going to be okay. And I so love that, because even you see Jesus helping people's faith, helping, comfort them, and, building them up, which I need. Anyways, but I hope that you love this. I hope that this will help you go in and look and get to know who Jesus is and his story, and maybe some of the authors of the Bible. I hope you have a blessed day.